أشراف مطلوب وطالبه لله أكرام من يمشي على قدم. العلم نور مبين يستضيء به أهل السعادات والجهال في الظلم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين. أما بعد. طيب, a quick recap on the last class. What is the meaning of talaq? To free ones. Naam, that's linguistically. What about the Shari'i meaning? Khalas, that's it. Yeah. Definitions are good to memorize, but at the end of the day, what's most important is that you know the meaning of talaq. طيب. What's the ruling of talaq? All five rulings, al-ahkam al-khamsa. طيب, when does it become wajib? Talaq, when does it become wajib? No, it's not a defect. It's not in that case. La, in that case, not wajib. When does it become makruh? There's no reason. Okay. When does it become haram? Okay. What else? Other situations where it becomes haram. Nah, when the woman's on a menses, when she's going through her haid. What else? Naam, ahsant. That's when it becomes. That's when it becomes wajib. And we shall see that it's called ila. That's when it becomes wajib. طيب. The divorce of the drunk person. What are the opinions of the scholars and what is the stronger opinion? No. Okay, so there's two opinions. There's those that say it's not counted, and there's those that say it is counted. Those that say it is counted, what evidence do they use? No. They use the general evidences from the Quran and the Sunnah stating that talaq takes place when a man utters the word talaq to his wife. طيب. What else? How many types of talaq are there in terms of Sunnah and Bid'ah? Two. What are they? Talaq al-Sunni, talaq al-Bid'i. What is talaq al-Sunni? Talaq al-Sunni, okay. One of the traits of a talaq Sunni is to do it once. Excellent. What else? Excellent. To have intercourse, to divorce her during a period where she's out of her menses and you haven't had intercourse with her in that time. Right, what else? Now, when she's pregnant. In those three instances, they are sunnah, talaq sunni, meaning mashru'. It doesn't mean that they are recommended, like in sunni here, a mashru', it is legislated. What about bid'i? When does it become bid'i? Okay, excellent. Something that opposes the sunnah when it is ghayr mashru'. And when, for example, when you say 3 times, Anti talaq bi thalath, I divorce you 3 times. What else? Saying it after you say naam. Once she's pure from her menses, then have a divorcing her at a time where they've had intercourse, where he's had intercourse with his wife during the time of purification. What else? When she is in a state of haid. These are talaqun bid'i. Talaq sunni, does it count? Is it valid? What about talaq bid'i? It counts. It counts, but he's sinful. And there are some scholars that say it doesn't count. What about the talaq of the angry person? He says, I was angry. 3 types of what? 3 types of anger. Really angry. Okay. They don't have any knowledge of what they're actually saying. So there's So there's the first type, which he's totally out of it. He doesn't know what he's saying. What's the ruling on that? It doesn't count. Okay. So if a person is so angry that they don't know what they're doing, then they are marfu' al-qalam. They don't. It doesn't count. What else? What is it? Qadab, which is يعني mild. It's not too much. Go on. The majority say it takes place. No. What's the stronger opinion? It takes place. The third type of anger. غضب خفيف. Anger that is not that much. طيب. طيب. The wordings for talaq, what are they? Clear wordings. And what are they called? Sarih. And unclear, such as go back to your family's house. طيب. What's the ruling on that? Right? The clear one takes place. طلاق صريح. طلقتك أنت مطلقة. That is clear and it takes place. It counts. What else? What's the second type? Not clear. Kinaya. And that goes back to the intention. طيب, what about kitaba, writing? It counts. Excellent. It counts as kinaya, but goes back to the intention. طيب. What about if a man says, in terms of talaq, what are the types of talaq in terms of when it takes place? Munajjaz, which is immediately, and mu'allaq, which is طيب. Who can explain what munajjaz means, or immediately? It takes place straight away. For example, I divorce you. طيب. What's the second type? معلق على شرط. Okay, example. نعم, if you leave the house, you're divorced. What's the ruling on that? On the type. And what are those different types? نعم, so saying طلاق على يعني to do talaq on something or to place it on something that is impossible. No, it doesn't take place. It's as if the man is saying, I will never divorce you. An example of that? I divorce you when I turn back to 15. طيب. I divorce you when the moon comes and sits in between us. طيب. What else? The second type? If the condition, what else? For example, if the talaq occurs. Okay, so if he says, if you leave the house, I'm going to divorce you, talaq counts? Okay, so one is when a person intends to divorce her. معلق بشيء يعني is connected to a time or something that is out of his control, which he means divorce. For example, مثلا, if he says to her, on the 1st of Ramadan, I'm going to divorce you. خلاص. He could not possibly mean to threaten her, because nothing could come by way of يعني, Ramadan coming. يعني, there's no benefit. Whereas if he was to say, if you leave the house, I'm going to divorce you, he can say, I meant to threaten her for her to stay in, for her to know that I'm serious. But he can't say, يعني, I wanted her to say, what can he say with Ramadan? Nothing. Or when the sun sets, I'm going to divorce you. You can't say I meant to threaten her, because whether you threaten her or not, she can't do nothing about the sun setting, or she can't do anything about Ramadan coming in. Like if he said it in order to get her to do something or to leave something off, then it goes back to the intention, and that is yameen. That is a kafara. That is a yameen. He does the expiation of a vow. طيب. Write these titles down for today's lesson, inshallah. Number 1, معنى طلاق البائن. معنى الطلاق البائن. معنى الطلاق البائن. لا خلاص كده. معنى طلاق البائن. Just write on there, rip it out later. I can keep it on there. And that means the meaning of irrevocable divorce. The meaning of irrevocable divorce. Number 2, أنواع الطلاق البائن. Types of الطلاق البائن. The types of irrevocable divorces. Number 3, كم تطليقات يملكها الرجل. كم تطليقات يملكها الرجل. And that means how many talaqs does the man have, own, possess. Number 4, بما تبين المرأة من زوجها. بما تبين المرأة من زوجها. With what does the woman become haram upon her husband, i.e. no longer a wife. i.e. no longer a wife. Number 5, ماذا عليه, what is upon him, ماذا عليه إذا انتهت الطلقات عنه. ماذا عليه إذا انتهت الطلقات عنه. What is upon him if the number of chances he had has ended, meaning if he's divorced her 3 times, for example. Number 6, ما معنى الطلاق الرجعي. ما معنى الطلاق الرجعي. What is the meaning of revocable divorce? Number 7, أحكام الرجعة. أحكام الرجعة. And then where it says أحكام الرجعة, put next to it 1, 2, 3. We'll mention those later, inshallah. Number 5, or what is number? Number 8, الإشهاد على النكاح والطلاق. الإشهاد على الطلاق not النكاح. الإشهاد على الطلاق. Taking witness or bringing a witness for divorce. The next one, طلاق الهازل, the divorce of the one that is joking. والخطأ, and the accident. والناسي, أو الهازل. والمخطئ والناسي. والمخطئ والناسي. The divorce of the one that is joking, the one that makes a mistake, and the one that forgets. طيب. And that is the matan. That is literally the matni, or the part that we're going to take down today, inshallah, broken down. So the Shaykh says, rahimahullah, فصل الطلاق البائن الطلاق البائن ورجعي. The talaq of the revocable talaq and the irrevocable talaq. As for the irrevocable talaq, let's leave that until the fifth point. طيب. لكن الطلاق البائن, the irrevocable talaq, طيب, is what we're gonna start off with. لكن the Shaykh says beforehand, ويملك. So you know where it says ويملك, put ميم 1, مسألة واحدة, أو المسألة الأولى, ميم واحد, ميم واحد. And the Shaykh says رحمه الله, ويملك الحر ثلاث طلقات. The hur, the person that is free, owns ثلاث طلقات. He owns 3 طلقات. Meaning when he marries a woman, he can divorce her 2 times, divorce her 3 times, and then on the third talaq, when he says to her, I divorce you, khalas, she cannot go back to him and he cannot go back to her unless the following happens, when we shall see in the matan, inshallah. So the first masala is, how many talaqat does the person that is hur have? I know the tartib changes a bit, lakin the answer is 3. Last week we were talking about how the talaq happens, صح? Okay. The talaq happens, مثلا, let's say, مثلا, if we say we're talking about the haid. Obviously, if a woman is pregnant and she is divorced, her husband divorced her, her iddah, her waiting period, is until she gives birth. When she gives birth, khalas, that's her waiting period gone. Whether she's got 7 months till her pregnancy, till giving birth, or she's got 2 days. Lakin, there could be the situation where she's not pregnant, صح? And that's where we said a talaq sunni and bid'i. For example, the correct way to do talaq is either when the woman is pregnant or in a purification where a man has not had intercourse with her. So let's say, for example, in February, she finishes her haid. The 1st of February, she finishes her haid. From the 1st of February until her next haid, he can divorce her, right? As long as he doesn't what? Have intercourse with her. So let's say the 1st of February, she ends her haid. She's now free from haid. And he hasn't had intercourse with her. He is now free to what? Divorce her. Right. So let's say he divorces her on the 15th of February. Right. The divorce takes place, it counts, and that is a sunni talaq. However, with regards to her iddah, her ثلاثة قروء, فالمطلقات يتربصن بأنفسهن ثلاثة قروء. These ثلاثة قروء, how do they take place? قروء. The next haid is the first quru'. The next haid. So let's say her haid starts on the 25th, let's say. That haid is number 1. That haid is number 1. Then what's going to happen when she finishes her haid? Let's say she gets her haid for 7 days. After the 7 days, what happens? She goes back into a state of purification. Then after that purification, what happens? What will happen in a month's time or so? Haid thani, a next haid, صح? That is her second haid. She's still within her iddah. Is that understood? She's still within her iddah. After that second haid, what happens naturally? Her haid ends and then she's pure again, صح? Right. Then when that purification, the third purification, when it ends, what's going to happen? The third haid comes. صح? That's 3 haids. 3 haids. So for the woman that experiences haid, that goes through haid, these 3 haids are her iddah. On the third haid, when the third haid ends, it ends and she becomes pure, she has her ghusl, she ends her haid, khalas, she is now out of the iddah period. She is now what? Out of the iddah period. So that is the talaq, and that is how the haid happens. That is how many haids that she has to wait. طيب. So the Shaykh says rahimahullah, وَيَمْلِكُ الْحُرُّ ثلاثة طلقات. So if he divorced his wife and he waited 3 haids and he did not say, I take you back, khalas, she's now divorced. How many goes? Once. Put that to one side. Then let's say in 3 months' time, or let's say in 6 months' time, he gets married to her again. Obviously, as we shall see, he has to do a new aqd, new meher, new contract, so on, and her wali has to be there, and the full works from the beginning. Let's say he marries her again, and then he divorces her. Literally divorces her after having intercourse with her. Divorces her, and then after she's been in her haid for a month and a half or a month, he says, Raja'tuki, I take you back. He has taken her back, sir. Khalas. That is his second talqa. He's used his second life, his second talqa with her. Understood? طيب. If he does the same thing again, he says to her after taking her back, I divorce you, that's the 3 talqat gone. That is the 3 talqat gone. Is that understood? So the hur, why did the Imam say, why did Shaykh say hur? Because the abd, the servant, he has what? He has 2 hur. He has 2 talqat. Lakin the hur person, or the one that is free, the normal, مثلا, he has 3 talaqat. طيب. And the evidence is الطلاق مرتان. Allah mentions 2. صح? Then Allah Jalla wa Ala says, فَإِن طَلَّقَهَا فَلَا تَحِلُّ لَهُ. That is the third one. So that is the first mas'ala out of the way. Then the Shaykh says, rahimahullah, if you have any questions, write them down later on. Then the Shaykh says, rahimahullah, فَإِن تَمَّتْ لَهُ فَإِن تَمَّتْ ماذا؟ The talqat. If the 3 talqat end for him, لَمْ تَحِلَّ لَهُ, she is not permissible for him, حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ. So now we're going into the shurud. He has now divorced her 3 times. Okay? He wants to marry her again. There we understand there's something called talaq al-ba'in, which the Shaykh used as a title. So write down the definition of a talaq al-ba'in, because after these 3 talqat, or after each talqa, what happens is there's something called talaq al-ba'in. So the first, or the meaning of talaq al-ba'in is ما لا يملك ما الطلاق البائن هو ما لا يملك الزوج فيه الرجعة على زوجته. طيب. So الطلاق البائن, pay attention, الطلاق البائن is the talaq that a man cannot just simply take his wife back. Remember when we were talking a few minutes ago about the talaq? When he said, I divorce you, and she finished her first hayd, and the second hayd, and the third hayd, what happens when the third hayd finishes? She's no longer his wife. She's no longer his wife. Is that understood? She's no longer his wife. He can't simply say, I take you back, come back home. Within the 3 talqat, as we're going to see, he can do so, and that is talaq raj'i. We're going to see that. Like for now, because the matan starts off with it, talaqul ba'in is that nikah in which his wife has finished her iddah, her 3 haids, and she is no longer his wife. Is that understood? And that is of 2 types. At-talaqul ba'in is the next title. At-talaqul ba'ini naw'an. The talaq, the irrevocable talaq, divorce, naw'an, is of 2 types. The first one, at-talaq al-ba'in al-kubra, the major divorce which is irrevocable. The second is at-talaq al-ba'in as-sughra, talaq which is irrevocable, lakin it's a minor one. It's the minor form. How many talaq do we have al-ba'in? 2. What are they? Major and minor. Kubra and sughra. Okay. Sughra is a man divorces his wife. Mathalan, he meets a woman. He marries her. First time man. He's never known her before. He marries her. After marrying her, he divorces her. Abdullah marries Hind. Abdullah marries Hind. He stays with Hind for about a week or so, or a month or whatever. Then he says, Ya Hind, طلقتك, أنت طالق, I divorce you. What has he said to Hind? I divorce you. Like Hind says, طيب. And he's divorced her at the correct time. He waits how many talqat with her? How many hayd does he wait? 3. Within these 3 haids, she's in her iddah, her waiting period. As for what iddah is, put that to one side for now. Like in her iddah period is the waiting period. After the third haid finishes, and she becomes pure and she prays, what happens after that? Is she his wife anymore? Excellent. Ahsantum. She's no longer his wife. Sah? Right. However, if he wants to marry her again, what does he do? Simply does a proposal, goes to her wali, goes to her, agrees, does a meher, nikah, khalas. Good to go, sah? That's because it's a minor irrevocable, but it is a minor type. So he can make up for it, he can marry her again without any conditions. She's just like any normal woman now. So he can remarry her how he wants. If she agrees, obviously. Because she's no longer his wife, she's like any other woman in the world now. Is that understood? He can do so, right? Like, let's say he marries her again, and then they argue over something, and then he divorces her again. How many times has he divorced her now? Twice. Excellent. And her third haid ends. Khalas. She's no longer his what? His wife. How many times has he divorced her? Talaq ba'in sughra. 2 minor types of the irrevocable talaq. Ahsantum. Then he marries her a third time. He says, let's try this time, man. He marries her a third time. Then after 6 months, they can't live together. طلقتك يا Hind, I divorce you. And then she waits the first haid, the second haid, and the third haid ends, and she becomes pure. Is she his wife now? No. How many times has he divorced her? 3 times. Can he take her back now? That is called الطلاق الكبرى, طلاق البائن الكبرى. Remember the first time when he divorced her? We said he can simply go to her wali and ask of her hand. The second time he divorced her, what did we say? simply goes to her wali and says, allow me to marry her, صح? Then when he divorced her the second time, he married her a third time before he could go back, marry, go back, خلاص. But once he divorces her in the third go, it goes from being suqra, minor, to major, or the type that is irrevocable, and the major type that is irrevocable. Al-talaq al-ba'in al-kubra. He can no longer just go to his wali, go to her wali, and say, listen, sort things out, please. Or he can't go to her and say, he can't sweet talk her either. He can't talk to her. Well, he can talk to her, but he can't ask her permission, whether she's pleased or not. Nor the wali. Even if he says to her, I give you £1 million now, here and now, I marry you now. It's nothing to do with them. That is called at-talaq al-ba'in al-kubra. That is the major type. That major type is what the Shaykh is explaining now. He's now going to explain the conditions for marrying her again. And that is the fourth title which you've written. بما تبين لا لا نعم أنواع الطلاق. Talaq is how many types? Talaq al-kubra is, talaq al-ba'in is how many types? 2. What are they? Kubra and sughra. What is talaq sughra? Now, when you divorce a woman and she finishes her iddah, she's no longer your wife, but you can simply just go to her, marry her again. Provided you give the right meher, she agrees, and her wali is there. Khalas. You divorce her a second time, you can still marry her again. That is talaq what? Ba'in sughra. She's no longer your wife, but it's easy to make her your wife again, just simply by her agreeing and her wali and so on. Sorting things out that way. Conventional way. However, on the third go, it's not as easy as that. She is now, that is what you call talaq ba'in kubra. She is no longer your wife, and you can't marry her in the normal conventional way. There has to be conditions fulfilled. Have you understood up to here? So up to here, the Shaykh says, the next part, if you've understood that, you'll understand the next part. فَإِذَا, can you see where it says that? Right, Meme 2, Meme Ithnan. المسألة الثانية. The Shaykh says رحمه الله فإذا تمت له, if all of these 3 talaqat finish, لم تحل له, she is not halal for him, حتى, until, on top of that put shurud. On top of حتى put shurud. So the Shaykh says حتى تنكح زوجا غيره. That's 1. تنكح زوجا غيره. So in order for him to remarry the woman that he has divorced 3 times, there have to be 3 conditions. The first is she must marry another man before him. And that's in the matan. حتى تنكح زوجا غيره. Is that understood? بنكاح صحيح, and that nikah has to be a nikah that is sahih. So حتى تنكح زوجا غيره بنكاح صحيح. She has to marry a man with a nikah that is sahih. And we've already studied, when we studied Kitab al-Siyam, Kitab al-Nikah, there are conditions. For example, she has to agree. There has to be a wali there. If there's no wali, there's no nikah. Or if he disagrees. If there are no witnesses. So it has to be a correct nikah. The correct nikah is the one that you're accustomed with. That's the first condition. The second condition, write down, anywhere on your matan, write 2, عن رغبة. عن رغبة. Meaning, there must be a genuine interest between the 2. They genuinely want to marry one another. He wants to marry her, and she wants to marry him. Who wants to marry who? The other man, the third man, wants to marry the woman that he has divorced. So remember we said Abdullah married who? Hind. Hind can no longer marry Abdullah unless these conditions take place. She must marry a third party, another man, first and foremost. In a nikah that is sahih, that's the first condition. The second condition, an raghbatin, that you've written down, it has to be a nikah that they genuinely want to marry one another. لا 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 نكاح صحيح, that's واحد, that's one. And رغبة, I want you to add that on the mutton, on the side, which is that they genuinely want to marry one another. طبعا, of course she's not going to marry him again, is she? لا شوف, I've already said she can't marry him until these conditions are fulfilled. Therefore, there's no point mentioning him or غيره, because I've already said she can't marry him until what? These conditions are fulfilled. So there's no need to repeat, can't marry him. So she حتى تنكح زوجا غيره, she has to marry someone else بالنكاح صحيح. That nikah is صحيح. That is one. On the side, you should have written by now عن رغبة, that they genuinely want to marry one another. Okay, what does this mean? What does this condition take out? It takes out, for example, Abdullah can say, he can call his friend, listen, this woman, I want to marry her. You know she's my wife, obviously. But obviously I can't marry her. So I want you to go to her wali, go to the masjid, the imam, just say, do the nikah, khalas. Once you do the nikah, then divorce her. That condition of an raqbatin, that he genuinely wants to marry her, that takes that hila away. And that is a hila, that is like a deceit around the sharia. Huh? Trickery, na'am. As if you're cheating the rules of the sharia. So it has to be a nikah, he genuinely wants, he has to want to marry her. And that takes out the place of something called a muhallil. In some mujtama', some countries, some places, and in, throughout history, they've had something called a muhallil. Muhallil is like a man who is, his job is to make men and women halal for one another. That's his role. That's his full-time job. So for example, every man that divorces his wife 3 times, he'll go to Ali over here and say, listen, Ali, I need you to be a muhallil for me. Who do you want me to marry? Marry her for me. Marry her for me. And khalas, do your thing, divorce her immediately. Divorce her immediately. Then he goes, khalas, does the aqd, and then about an hour later or 2 days later, says, I divorce you. And then she goes back to her first husband. That nikah that he has done, the guy that is there to be hired out, is that a nikah that they want one another, they genuinely have an interest in one another? La. And that's haram. That is haram. Some mujtama'at, they actually have that. There's a person, and there's actually a hadith, I don't remember the authenticity of it, I think it was authentic. There was a hadith surrounding or on the meaning of that. A person who's just hired out to go do tahleel. And sometimes it can backfire. I think I've told you the story of a man who was, and he's known in the community. He literally just does that sort of tahleel for the man. He does a tahleel. So someone called him and said, listen, I want you to marry this woman, do the nikah, khalas, and then divorce her. He done the nikah, and then he found that she was beautiful. And he said, I'm not going to divorce her, that's my wife now. Then there was a big, there was war between the two. Because he said, listen, I asked you to just divorce her immediately. I had to marry her immediately and divorce her. He goes, yeah, but she's now my wife, so I want to keep her. So it backfired on him. So that condition of an raqbatin, it takes that deceit out. Is that understood? Tayus al-musta'ar, that's the one. Tayus al-musta'ar. Like a goat that is rented out, for example, musta'ar, or borrowed or whatever. Subhanallah. Right.
That nikah that money will be considered. If he chooses to keep her, would that aqd be considered?
Would that aqd be considered if he chooses to keep her? No, be considered. Yeah, but although the intention is there, but the nikah was sahih. For him, it was sahih. He can keep her. But the fact that it's sahih doesn't mean it's halal. And what he done was sahih. Like for the first man, it won't make her halal.
No, I'm talking about the man that married Muhallil.
The muhallil, if the conditions were there, khalas, that nikah is sound. If the conditions were there, doesn't matter about his intention. And raqbatin tayyib. So that is the second condition. وَيَطَأُهَا is the third condition. And that is on the matan. So put 3 on top of the word وَيَطَأُهَا. وَيَطَأُهَا. And the meaning of that is they actually have to have intercourse. The wife that he divorced 3 times and her new husband have to actually have intercourse. That is a condition. And that also takes the possibility away of the tahleel business, whereby a person just says, I'm going to make your first wife halal for you by doing the aqd contract. And the evidence for that is the hadith in which a woman came to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she said she complained about her husband. She complained about her husband, and she said something about him anyway that wasn't befitting. And the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Verily, I know you want to go back to Rafa'a." She wanted to go back to her first husband. So the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, لا حتى تذوق عسيلتك حتى يذوق عسيلتك وتذوق عسيلته, until you have intercourse, basically. So that cancels out the possibility of people playing around with the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it has to be a nikah that is sahih, that is correct, in which, number 2, they both want to genuinely want to marry one another, and thirdly, there must be intercourse. If these 3 conditions are fulfilled, then if they do divorce, the new husband and his previous wife, if they do divorce, he can marry her again. He can marry her again. And that was called the talaq al-ba'in al-kubra. So talaq al-sughra, the talaq al-ba'in al-sughra, the minor irrevocable talaq, what does he need to do if he wants to remarry her? Yeah? Nothing. Normal contract, nikah. Go to her wali, conditions and so on. That's number 1. What about the talaq al-ba'in al-kubra? What does he have to do if he wants to take her back after divorcing her 3 times? She has to marry with a correct nikah while they have an interest in one another and they want to marry one another, and they have to have intercourse. Excellent. And then they have to divorce. But then obviously he wouldn't marry her while she's already a wife of someone anyway. So they would have to divorce. So that can be added as a 4th condition. Then they have to divorce. Then what happens is, after she's been divorced in that case, then she goes back, he can marry her again. She's already been married in a nikah that was sahih, that she wanted to take part in, and they had intercourse, khalas. She is now allowed to marry him again. He's allowed to marry her. And they start from a clean slate. So he's now got 3 talqat to divorce her. Is that understood? Then the Shaykh says, rahimahullah, لِقَوْلِهِ تَعَالَى طَلَاقٌ مَرَّتَانِ. That is because طَلَاقٌ مَرَّتَانِ. Talaq, you're allowed to divorce her 2 times. That is طَلَاقٌ رَجْعِ that we're going to see. إِلَى قَوْلِهِ, and to the verse of Allah, فَإِن طَلَّقَهَا, if he divorces her, meaning for the 3rd go, if he divorces her on the 3rd go, فَلَا تَحِلُّ لَهُ مِن بَعْدُ حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ زَوْجًا غَيْرَهُ, then she is not halal for him, meaning after he's divorced his wife 3 times, she's not halal for him unless she gets married to someone else. Is that understood? So now you know the amount of talqat that a person is entitled to, that a man is entitled to. You know the types, you know the meaning of talaq ba'in, irrevocable talaq, and you know the types of talaq that is irrevocable, or talaq al-ba'in. How many types? 2. Major and minor. Major is what? After you've divorced her 3 times, a man divorces his wife 3 times. That is talaq ba'in kubra. In order to marry her again, what needs to happen? She has to marry another man with a nikah that is sahih. And raqba, that they both want to marry one another. And they have to have intercourse. If these 3 conditions are met and then they divorce for whatever reason, then he's allowed to marry her again. And they start the clean slate of 3 strikes again. Talaq al-kubra is what? Al-ba'in al-sughra is the minor. is when he divorces her once, خلاص, he can marry her again. She's no longer his wife, but he can marry her if he wants. He's like any other man to her. The second go as well, when he marries her, divorces her the second go, he can also go back to her again on a third go. طيب. The next mas'ala is number 4. بما تبين المرأة من زوجها. What does a woman become ba'in from her husband? Meaning he cannot remarry her immediately. How does a woman become haram, or he cannot marry her immediately? The Shaykh says, rahimahullah, you know where it says, وَيَقَعُ طَلَاقُ? Can you see that? In the matan? وَيَقَعُ, put mim thalatha. Mim thalatha. The third mas'ala. The third mas'ala. So the Shaykh says, rahimahullah, in the third mas'ala, وَيَقَعُ طَلَاقُ بَائِنًا, talaq becomes ba'in في أربع مسائل, in 4 masail, 4 issues. So ba'in, the talaq that is ba'in, we've only learned what ba'in is so far. We haven't learned what raj'i is. The talaq that is ba'in, the irrevocable talaq, is in 4 instances. He says the first one is هذه إحداها. This is إحداها. This is one of them. What? هذه ماذا? What is he referring to? Al-Kubra. أحسنتم. Where he divorces her 3 times. أي الكبرى. هذه إحداها. نعم. فإذا تمت له. If all of the 3 talqat finish, then that is kubra. That is what he means by هذه إحداها. Meaning the one that I've just mentioned, the aforementioned one, is one of them. So you need to put 1 on top of there. Or alif is the one that we've just studied, where he divorced her 3 times. Is that understood? طيب. وإذا طلق, and if he divorces her قبل الدخول, before دخول. دخول means literally before entering. And we shall see what دخول consists of. لقوله تعالى, due to the verse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, يا أيها الذين آمنوا, O you who believe, إذا نكحتم المؤمنات, if you marry the women, the believing women, ثم طلقتموهن, and then you divorce her, من قبل أن تمسوهن, without having intercourse with them, فما لكم عليهن من عدة تعتدونها, then there is no عدة that they need to count. Surah Al-Mas'ala, pay attention. These 3 talaq, if he divorces her, he can't marry her, صح? Again, unless he can marry someone else. Right. The third or the second is, if he marries her, مثلا, let's say he marries her, مثلا, he's in London and she's somewhere in the Middle East. They do nikah. They do nikah today. And then tomorrow, once she's there and he's here, he says, you know what, I don't want to carry on this nikah. I want to divorce her. Then he divorces her. He divorces her. That is called talaq al-ba'in as-sughra. He can no longer marry her, he can no longer count her as his wife, and she doesn't have to count any iddah period. There's no 3 haids or anything like that. Because he hasn't seen her anyway. He hasn't entered into her home, for example. So he married her, without even seeing her, he divorced her. In that case, she becomes ba'in anhu. Meaning she's like any other woman now. If he wants to remarry her, what does he have to do? A normal aqd. A normal aqd. Surah Al-Mas'ala, have you understood it? Who can explain it? Before divorcing, then something has to happen. If a man marries a woman, they haven't consummated the marriage. Consummated. I'm coming to that, the meaning of it. They haven't seen one another. Let's say that for now. They haven't seen one another. And then he divorces her. He says, I divorce, talaqtuki. Picks up the phone, says, talaqtuki. That woman now, there is no waiting period. There is no haid that she has to wait for and so on. Khalas. she's immediately divorced from him and she's no longer his wife. If he wants to marry her again, he needs to do what? New talaq. He has to marry, he has to do a new nikah. That is called قبل الدخول. That is what he means. The next mas'ala you may ask is, what is dukhul? How does dukhul happen? Dukhul happens with one of two things. Dukhul happens with one of two things. Dukhul happens with one of two things. Either he has intercourse with her, number one, he has intercourse with her. That is considered dukhul. Or the second is, he and she, or they both are alone in a situation whereby if they wanted to have intercourse, they could. They are both alone whereby if they wanted to have intercourse, يتمكن من ذلك. He is able to do so. They are able to do so. So, for example, he marries her, خلاص, he marries her. And then the nikah was done in the daytime, and then in the evening, he's home, and then she comes. The family bring her to the home. So there's just her and him in the house. That is called khalwa. Khalwa has taken place. And if they want to have intercourse, they can, right? It's only them two in the house. So that is called dukhul. They may not have intercourse. That's none of our business. Our concern is that they're alone and they're able to have intercourse. Khalas. If that happens, then it is not talaq al-ba'in al-sughra. So, talaq al-ba'in al-sughra, where she becomes like any other woman, is when he marries her, they do the nikah, but he does talaq, he divorces her without even seeing her. Without seeing her. Let's say, مثلا, over the phone, يعني. مثلا, الآن, she's in West London, he's in East London. They do the nikah at 6 p.m. Then he has second doubts. He has doubts, second thoughts he's having. So at 7 o'clock, he says, you know what, while he's still here and she's still there, khalas, you know what, I divorce you. Now that he has divorced her, that is called talaq al-ba'in al-sughra. She is no longer his wife. She's like any other woman to him now. However, the sughra part, when does it come into it? The minor part means he can simply take her back and he can simply marry her again. There's nothing preventing him from marrying her again. Is that understood? Lakin, so a person may say, when does it become his wife? When does dukhul happen? It's one of two instances. If they have intercourse, that's clear. Or if they are alone, to the extent that they can have intercourse if they wanted to, that is taken into consideration as well. She is now his wife. And if he wants to divorce her, that goes to talaq raj'i that we're going to see inshallah. Is that understood? وَإِذَا طَلَّقَ قَبْلَ الدُّخُولِ, that's the meaning. The verse of Allah Jalla wa Ala literally says, if you divorce them and you don't have intercourse with them, then there's no iddah, there's no waiting period. Is that understood?
Where did they get khalwa from?
Sah, lakin they say khalwa, we don't know if he's touched her or not. We don't know if he's touched her or not. We've allowed them to enter the house together or in a room alone, and they're halal for one another. We don't care what's happened because they can lie. They can lie. We don't care. We're not going to put ourselves in that pickle. Khalwa, khalwa. Khalas. If you didn't want to marry her, khalas, don't even go in that room. Don't go alone together. Lakin, mathalan, let's say there's a massive hall, and then they do the nikah. Then he's sitting on a table, and she's, and then she comes, and they're sitting on a table, and their table is about 2-3 meters away from everyone else. They're talking about everything and so on. Is that khalwa? Obviously, he hasn't had intercourse with her because they can see her. But secondly, there's no what? Khalwa. That's not khalwa. Khalwa is when they are in a room alone or in a house alone. That's when khalwa takes place. Right. So that's the second type. Is that understood? Okay. Then the Shaykh says, rahimahullah, وَإِذَا كَانَ فِي نِكَاحٍ فَاسِد. And if it is in a nikah that is fasid. وَإِذَا كَانَ, put jim. Or you can put 3, however you want to number them. طيب, don't get lost, students. Talaq ba'in now is of 2 types we've studied. There are 2 more types to study. The first 2 types, he divorces her 3 times. The second type that we've just studied is when he does the nikah, but then without consummating the marriage, he divorces her. The third type is this one. وَإِذَا كَانَ فِي نِكَاحٍ فَاسِد. If it is a nikah that is fasid. Irrevocable. Whether it's suqra or kubra. طيب. So how many have we got? 2. This is the third one. وَإِذَا كَانَ فِي نِكَاحٍ فَاسِد. If it is a nikah that is fasid. Okay? The nikah that is fasid, in order to understand that, we need to know the types of nikah. And the types of nikah are, write down, the types of nikah are 3. Types of nikah are 3. The first is nikahun sahihun. A nikah that is sahih. And there is consensus among the scholars that that is a correct nikah. For example, a man marries a woman, her wali, her father is there, her meher is in place, there are witnesses, they're both happy with it, khalas, he marries her. That is called nikah sahih. That all of the one that you're all used to hearing about. The second is nikahun batilun. Nikah that is totally batil, false. And nikah that is batil, false, is the nikah that the scholars agree upon that it's batil. It's not even, doesn't even count for anything. Doesn't count for anything. For example, a man marrying one of his relatives, wal-'iyadhu billah, sister or so on. Or a man marrying a woman and her auntie. Or a man marrying 2 sisters. One of those nikahs is batil, because they are haram. The third type of nikah is nikahun fasid. Nikah that is fasid, it is corrupt, incorrect. And that is the one that the scholars differ over whether it is correct or not. Whether it is correct or not. An example of this is an-nikah bila wali. The nikah bila wali. A nikah without a wali. So the nikah fasid is what? The nikah that the scholars differ over. Some say is correct and some say is invalid. The example that I mentioned is a nikah that has no wali. A man marries a woman and her wali is not there, he just marries her. Whilst he and she believe, whilst he believes that a wali is a condition. Whilst he believes that a wali is a condition for nikah. Whilst he believes that a wali is a condition for nikah. Surah al-Mas'ala. A man, مثلا, who's a Shafi'i or a Hanbali or a Maliki, he wants to marry a woman. But her father says, listen, I don't like you. I just don't like you. I'm not going to give my daughter to you. He says, Sah, طيب. Then he says, he goes to a Hanafi masjid. He goes to a Hanafi masjid. He says, Ya Imam, I want to marry this woman. Alhamdulillah, she's in her early 20s. And she's over the age of 18. She's a responsible adult. Do the nikah for us. He says, طيب. He does the nikah for them. That nikah is called nikah fasid. بالنسبة له. For him it's called nikah fasid. Why? Because he knows that the wali is a condition for the nikah. It's not an opinion that he holds. However, because he knew her wali is going to refuse, he decided to run away and do a hila, which is deceit. And the hila لا تنفع في الشريعة. الحيل لا تنفع في الشريعة. Hiyal or deceit is trying to go around and find loopholes, they don't work in the Sharia. Therefore, if he goes to a Hanafi masjid on purpose, knowing that her father's going to refuse, that nikah is called nikah fasid. Is that understood? Have you understood these three types? طيب. However, pay attention. A Hanafi marries another woman that is a Hanafi. Without a wali, their nikah doesn't come into this situation. Why? Because they genuinely believe it's correct. طيب. Put that to one side. So the Sheikh says, وَإِذَا كَانَ فِي نِكَاحٍ فَاسِد. If the nikah is fasid, for example, where a man marries a woman without her wali knowing, and he knows that the wali is a condition, their nikah is nikah fasid. So due to the dangerousness of that, if he divorces his wife for whatever reason, he can't remarry her immediately. He can't just take her back. That happens, talaq al-ba'in al-sughra happens. So he can't take her back. Surat al-mas'ala, that man that we said, he went to a Hanafi masjid knowing that her father's going to refuse. Let's say he marries her, khalas. But then he says to her, listen, طلقتك, I divorce you. He says, طلقتك. What happens in that case? As soon as he says, طلقتك, he can't go back to her. He can't take her back. He can't do raj'i that we're going to see. In order to marry her, he needs to go through the whole process again. And why do they say that? لأن أصلا كان فاسدا. أصلا it was fasid anyway. We only let you do it because someone done it for you. Like in the fact that you have divorced her, you've put yourself in a dilemma again. You can't take her back except if you go back to that wali who you tricked however many months ago. Is that understood? So how many types of talaq al-ba'in have we studied so far? 3. If he divorces her 3 times, that is called ba'in. Second, if he divorces her after marrying her without consummating the marriage, that is called what? That is a divorce. Like, and that is sughra. He can remarry her immediately. The third is if he marries her after having a nikah, that is fasid. Is that understood? The third is وَإِذَا كَانَ عَلَى عِوَدٍ. If it is upon عِوَد, يعني وَإِذَا كَانَ put dal or right 4. And that على عِوَد is something which is called al-khul'. Something which is called al-khul'. Al-khul' is when a woman buys her freedom. طبعا, remember last week that I said that there were 3 types of separation between a man and a woman. The first was what? Talaq, divorce. And that's in the hands of the man. The second was what? Al-khul'. Al-khul' is when the woman when the wife wants to divorce, she wants to leave this man. She wants to be separated from him. She forfeits some of her rights. Like her meher. She forfeits her meher. Or she pays a certain amount to him to get rid of him. That is called khul'. طيب, if she does that, مثلا a man marries he marries her, and he says to her, they consummate the marriage and they've been married for 2 weeks, and she says, listen, I can't stand you anymore. I don't want to be in a marriage with you anymore. Then for her to get, he says, I'm not going to divorce her. Like, for her to get out of it, she has to do something which is called khul'. And khul', so he says, give me my meher back. I gave you £10,000 meher. Give my money back. She said, khalas, that's fine. Go to the bank, give me your details. Khalas. She sends him the details. Immediately pays 10,000. That is called khul'. Once he gives her that khul' and she takes it, she's no longer his wife. He can't remarry her immediately. Is that understood? طيب. There's no idda as well. With talaq, with khul', there's no idda. There's something called istibra' that we're going to see soon, which is we have to see if she's pregnant or not. She can't immediately remarry someone else because we have to see if she's married or if she's pregnant or not. But that's something that's to come. But if a woman does khul', she pays a certain amount to get free, to be freed from her husband, divorced, to be separated, sorry, not divorced, to be separated, then he can't immediately marry her. Is that understood? Right. So we'll stop there and we'll continue after Salah, inshallah.
وقل رب زدني